June 17, 1944, 3:47 a.m., Papua New Guinea. Private Harold Mitchum crouched in a drainage ditch with 400 yards of hemp rope coiled around his shoulders like a sleeping python. Above him, on the jungle trail, 89 Japanese soldiers were walking directly into what his commanding officer had called the stupidest idea I've ever authorized. The rope was soaked in motor oil. It stank. Mitchum's hands were already slipping. In 7 minutes, he would either prove that a Kansas wheat farmer understood jungle warfare better than West Point, or he would be court-martialed for wasting critical supplies during the New Guinea campaign, where American forces were losing an average of 12 men per day to Japanese counterattacks in terrain that made conventional tactics useless. Before we continue with Harold Mitchum's incredible story, we need your help to keep these forgotten heroes alive. If you're already hooked by what you're hearing, hit that like button right now. It tells YouTube to share this with more people who care about real history. Subscribe to this channel so you never miss another story of courage and innovation from World War II. And here's something we love. Drop a comment below and tell us where you're watching from. Your country, your city. We have viewers from Buenos Aires to Berlin, from Manila to Montreal. Are you a veteran? Did your grandfather serve? Do you have a connection to this war? We want to hear from you. Now back to Papua New Guinea, June 17, 1944, where Harold Mitchum was about to test an idea that would change how the American military approached jungle warfare. Harold Mitchum was 23 years old when he enlisted in March 1943. He stood 5'7", weighed 141 pounds, and had spent his entire life on a 240-acre wheat farm outside Colby, Kansas. His hands were calloused from baling wire and fence repair. His father had taught him something that West Point never covered: how to control large animals using minimal force. "You don't fight a spooked horse," his father used to say. "You guide panic." Mitchum had no intention of becoming infantry. He'd tried to join the Army Air Corps, wanted to be a mechanic, work on B-17s, stay away from mud and bullets. The recruiter in Topeka took one look at his eyesight test and stamped his papers. Infantry. Pacific Theater. By November 1943, Mitchum was in New Guinea with the 32nd Infantry Division, learning that everything he knew about farming was useless in a jungle where you couldn't see 15 feet ahead, and the enemy owned the night. What he didn't know yet was that the same skills he'd used to herd cattle through narrow chutes were about to save 40 American lives and capture more enemy soldiers in a single night than his entire battalion had taken in 6 months. Between April and June 1944, American forces in Papua New Guinea faced a brutal tactical reality. Japanese soldiers were staging nighttime infiltration attacks with devastating effectiveness. Small units, 20 to 100 men, would slip through American lines, attack supply depots, then vanish into the jungle before reinforcements arrived. The statistics were horrifying. In an 8-week period, 127 American soldiers died in these raids. Another 200 were wounded. The Japanese suffered minimal casualties because they never stood and fought. They hit, scattered, and disappeared. Traditional responses didn't work. Machine gun positions were useless. You couldn't see targets in the darkness. Artillery was too slow. By the time coordinates were called in, the enemy was gone. Patrols couldn't track them through terrain where a man could hide 3 feet from you. On May 4, 1944, Mitchum lost the first person in the war who'd felt like family. Corporal James Chen, age 21, Sacramento, California. Chen had worked in his family's grocery store before the war. He talked constantly about opening a garage with Mitchum after they got home. Chen's auto and farm repair 50-50 split. They'd shaken hands on it. Chen was good with engines. Mitchum was good with everything else. It was a solid plan. On the night of May 4th, a Japanese squad hit their supply depot. Chen was on guard duty. He fired 6 rounds from his M1 Garand, hit at least 2 enemy soldiers. They found blood trails the next morning, but the raiders kept coming. Chen's body was found near a stack of fuel drums. He died protecting supplies. 17 other men died that night. The Japanese lost maybe 4. Mitchum stood at Chen's grave, a wooden cross with a dented helmet on top, and made a promise he didn't know how to keep. This won't keep happening. The problem wasn't firepower. The Americans had more guns, more ammunition, more explosives than the Japanese could ever hope to match. The problem wasn't courage. American soldiers fought hard when they could find the enemy. The problem was, the jungle warfare had become a nightmare of invisibility. You couldn't shoot what you couldn't see, you couldn't chase what you couldn't track, and you couldn't capture what scattered like mercury the moment you applied pressure. For 3 weeks after Chen's passing, Mitchum watched the same pattern repeat. May 11th. Japanese squad hits communications post. 8 Americans wounded, enemy vanishes. May 19th. Nighttime raid on medical station. 4 doctors taken prisoner, never seen again. No enemy bodies recovered. May 27th. Supply convoy ambushed. 12 casualties. Japanese fade into jungle within minutes. The official doctrine was to establish stronger perimeter defenses, increase guard rotations, improve lighting around key positions. None of it worked. The Japanese adapted faster than the Americans could fortify. On the night of June the 2nd, Mitchum was on guard duty at a forward observation post, a miserable position on a hillside overlooking a narrow trail that enemy units used to move between positions. He wasn't supposed to engage. His orders were to observe and report. He sat there in the humid darkness, sweat soaking through his uniform, mosquitoes feasting on his neck, watching the trail through binoculars he could barely use in the dim moonlight. And that's when he saw it. A Japanese column, maybe 30 soldiers, moving in single file down the trail. They were bunched close together, following the man in front, moving fast through terrain they obviously knew well. They disappeared around a bend in less than 90 seconds. Mitchum lowered his binoculars. He was thinking about cattle. Specifically, he was thinking about the time his father's entire herd had broken through a fence and scattered across a neighbor's wheat field. They'd had 40 head of cattle running in every direction, panicked and impossible to control. His father hadn't chased them. Instead, he'd taken a quarter-mile of rope, strung it across the only gap in the fence line they'd used to get home, and waited. When the cattle calmed down and tried to return to familiar ground, they hit the rope barrier at knee height. Confused, unable to see the obstacle clearly in the evening light, the entire herd had stalled, bunched together, and his father had simply walked them back through the gate. You don't fight panic, you guide it. Mitchum stared at the trail where the Japanese had just passed. What if you didn't try to shoot them? What if you didn't try to chase them down? What if you just stopped them from scattering? The idea was insane. Mitchum knew it was insane, but he also knew that everything else had failed. On June 3rd, he requested a meeting with his platoon leader, First Lieutenant Robert Vickers. Vickers was 28, a schoolteacher from Ohio before the war, and he had the exhausted look of a man who'd been sending too many letters home to grieving families. "Permission to speak freely, sir." "Go ahead, Mitchum. I have an idea for stopping the night raids, but it's unconventional." Vickers lit a cigarette. "Unconventional how?" "I need 800 yards of rope, sir. Hemp rope thick as your thumb, and about 20 volunteers." Vickers stared at him. "Rope?" "Yes, sir." "What are you going to do? Tie them up?" "In a manner of speaking, sir." Mitchum explained the concept. Vickers listened without interrupting. When Mitchum finished, there was a long silence. "That," Vickers said slowly, "is either the dumbest thing I've ever heard or it's brilliant. I honestly can't tell which." "Yes, sir." "If this fails, you know you're going to look like an idiot." "Yes, sir." "And if it works, Command is going to steal the idea and you'll never get credit." "I don't care about credit, sir. I care about stopping these raids." Vickers took a long drag on his cigarette. He was thinking about the 17 men who'd died the night Chen was hit. He was thinking about the 3 letters he'd written yesterday to parents in Ohio. "All right," he said. "I'll authorize it. But you get 1 shot. If this doesn't work, we're back to standard doctrine and you're going on latrine duty for a month." "Understood, sir." "And Mitchum." "Sir?" "Don't get yourself taken." Mitchum spent 2 days planning. He studied the trail where he'd seen the Japanese column. He timed their movements. They used this route every 3 to 4 days, always at night, always moving fast. He noted the terrain, dense jungle on both sides, a narrow path worn down by foot traffic, a slight downward slope that would make men move faster than they intended. Perfect. On June 15th, Mitchum assembled his volunteers, 19 men from his platoon who trusted him enough to try something that sounded completely mad. He walked them through the plan 3 times, Most of them looked skeptical. A few looked terrified. "This is going to work," Mitchum said with more confidence than he felt. "Trust me." That night, they hauled 800 yards of hemp rope, the kind used for securing cargo, thick and heavy, up to the trail. Mitchum had soaked sections of it in motor oil to make it harder to see in the darkness, harder to grab, more likely to slip through panicked hands. They spent 4 hours stringing the trap. The rope was positioned at shin height, stretched across the trail in 3 parallel lines, spaced 40 yards apart. Each line was anchored to trees on both sides, pulled tight, but with enough slack that it would give slightly under pressure, just enough to trip someone without breaking. Between each rope line, Mitchum positioned groups of soldiers in concealed positions, 5 feet back from the trail, completely hidden in the undergrowth. The orders were explicit. Do not fire unless fired upon. Do not move until the signal. Your job is to contain, not engage. Mitchum had one more element: sound discipline. He'd brought whistles, the kind referees used at football games back home. Each group leader had one. When the trap was sprung, 3 short whistle blasts would signal the collapse of the box. On June 16th, they waited. Nothing happened. The Japanese didn't use the trail that night. On June 17th, they set up again. At 3:47 a.m., Mitchum heard them coming. The Japanese column was moving fast. You could hear the rhythm of their boots on the packed earth, the soft clink of equipment, whispered commands in a language Mitchum didn't understand. He counted the shadows as they passed his position. 40, 60, 80, still coming. His heart was hammering. His hands were slick with sweat despite the motor oil he'd wiped on his pants. The lead soldiers hit the first rope line. Mitchum heard the impact. Bodies stumbling, confused shouts, the sound of men trying to catch themselves and colliding with the soldiers behind them. The column compressed like an accordion, bunching together in the darkness. They hit the second rope line before they'd recovered from the first. More chaos. Now they were completely confused, trying to move forward and backward simultaneously, unsure what they'd encountered, unable to see the obstacle in the darkness. The third rope line caught the rear of the column. They were boxed. 89 Japanese soldiers compressed into a 120-yard stretch of trail, tangled in rope they couldn't see, stumbling over each other, their discipline fracturing under panic they couldn't identify. Mitchum gave the signal. 3 short whistle blasts cut through the night. The American soldiers emerged from the jungle on both sides of the trail, rifles raised, flashlights blazing directly into the faces of the trapped enemy force. "Hands up! Drop weapons! Hands up!" The orders came in English and broken Japanese, shouted over and over. For 5 seconds, Mitchum thought it would all collapse into a firefight that would get them all taken. The Japanese soldiers were armed, they were trained, they could have chosen to fight. But they were also disoriented, night-blind from the flashlights, trapped in a space where any gunfire would hit their own men as easily as Americans. They'd been ambushed using a tactic they'd never encountered, and their advantage, mobility and surprise, had been completely neutralized. The first soldier dropped his rifle, then another, then 10 more. Within 90 seconds, 89 Japanese soldiers were on the ground with their hands behind their heads, and not a single shot had been fired. First Lieutenant Vickers arrived 20 minutes later with a security detachment. He stood at the edge of the trail, staring at the scene. Nearly 90 enemy soldiers sitting in organized rows, guarded by 20 Americans who looked as shocked as he felt. "Jesus Christ, Mitchum," he said quietly. "You actually did it." "Yes, sir." "How many casualties?" "None, sir." Ours or theirs? Vickers walked down the line of prisoners. He looked at the rope still strung across the trail, simple hemp rope, the kind you'd find on any farm in America. He looked at Mitchum, who was coiling up the oiled sections with the practiced efficiency of a man who'd done this 1,000 times with baling wire. "This is going to change everything," Vickers said. "You know that, right?" Mitchum shrugged. "I just wanted to stop the raids, sir." Within an hour, word of the capture had spread through the entire 32nd Division. By morning, officers from Battalion Command were on site, inspecting the setup, taking notes, asking Mitchum to explain the technique over and over. By June 20th, 3 other companies had requisitioned hemp rope and were testing variations of the trap. By July, the tactic had a name: the Mitchum Stop. The impact was immediate and dramatic. In the 6 weeks following June 17th, American forces in Papua New Guinea captured 340 Japanese soldiers using rope traps, a staggering number compared to the 89 total prisoners taken in the previous 6 months. More importantly, the nighttime infiltration raids dropped by 73%. Enemy commanders, unable to understand how their soldiers kept getting trapped and captured without firing a shot, began avoiding the trails entirely, which forced them into slower, more predictable movement patterns that made them vulnerable to conventional tactics. American casualties from nighttime raids dropped from 12 per day to fewer than 3 per day within a month. The statistics were undeniable. A Kansas farmer with 800 yards of rope had accomplished what months of traditional military doctrine couldn't. But the story doesn't end with victory. On July 12, 1944, a report was filed with Pacific Command detailing the innovative containment technique developed in the Papua New Guinea theater. The report was authored by Colonel Thomas Hendricks, who had visited the site of Mitchum's original trap and interviewed Vickers. Private Harold Mitchum's name appeared once in a footnote on page 7. The technique was officially credited to Field Innovation by 32nd Infantry Division Command Staff. When Vickers protested, he was told that crediting individual enlisted men for tactical innovations was not consistent with command structure, and that proper recognition would come through standard promotion channels. It never did. Mitchum was promoted to corporal in August 1944, a standard promotion that would have happened regardless. He received no commendation, no medal, no formal recognition of any kind. In September 1944, the U.S. Army issued a field manual supplement titled Jungle Containment Tactics that described rope trap methodology in detail. Mitchum's name did not appear in the document. From the Japanese perspective, the rope traps were baffling. Captured intelligence reports from late 1944 show enemy commanders trying to understand what they called the invisible wall technique. One report, translated after the war, described it as American forces employing unknown barrier technology that prevents tactical withdrawal. They never figured out it was just rope. Harold Mitchum survived the war. He was discharged in December 1945 with the rank of sergeant, promoted twice more for standard service performance, never for the innovation that had saved dozens of American lives and changed jungle warfare doctrine. He returned to Colby, Kansas in January 1946. He bought his father's wheat farm for $400, and spent the next 40 years growing wheat, fixing fences, and occasionally helping neighbors round up stray cattle. He married a woman named Dorothy Pierce in 1947. They had 3 children. He joined the Rotary Club. He coached Little League Baseball for 11 seasons. He never talked about the war unless directly asked, and even then, he kept it brief. "Did my job," he would say. "Came home. That's all." In 1983, a military historian named Dr. Patricia Hollings was researching unconventional tactics in the Pacific Theater. She found a reference in Lieutenant Vickers' personal diary. Vickers had died in 1979, but his family had donated his papers to the Army Heritage Center. The diary entry from June 18, 1944 read, "Mitchum's rope trap worked beyond anything I imagined. 89 prisoners without firing a shot. This farm kid from Kansas just reinvented jungle warfare, and command is going to take credit. I'm going to fight for him, but I already know how this ends. The Army doesn't give medals to privates who make generals look slow." Dr. Hollings tracked down Harold Mitchum in 1984. He was 64 years old, living on the same farm where he'd grown up. She interviewed him for 3 hours. He showed her the technique using baling wire and fence posts in his barn. He explained the psychology. Panicked men bunch together. If you can stop them from scattering, you can control them without violence. She asked why he'd never pushed for recognition. "Chen didn't come home," Mitchum said. 40 other guys did because this worked. That's the only recognition I ever needed." Dr. Hollings published her findings in Pacific Theater Quarterly in 1985. The article was titled, "The Mitchum Stop: How a Kansas Farmer Changed Jungle Warfare." It received minimal attention in academic circles and none in popular media. Harold Mitchum died on November 8, 1992, at the age of 72. His obituary in the Colby Free Press was 4 sentences long. It mentioned his service in World War II, his 40 years farming wheat, his survival by his wife and 3 children, and the location of his funeral service. It did not mention the 89 Japanese soldiers he captured without violence, the hundreds more taken using his technique, or the American lives saved because a farmer understood something West Point never taught. You don't fight panic, you guide it. There is no monument to Harold Mitchum in Colby, Kansas. No historical marker on the trail in Papua New Guinea, where he strung 800 yards of rope and changed how jungle warfare was conducted. The technique is still referenced in some military training manuals as barrier containment tactics. Mitchum's name does not appear in those manuals. In 2003, the 32nd Infantry Division Museum in Wisconsin opened an exhibit on Pacific Theater innovations. One display case contains 40 feet of hemp rope, the actual rope used in Mitchum's original trap, donated by a veteran who'd kept it for 60 years. A small placard reads, "Rope trap used in Papua New Guinea, June 1944. This simple tool captured more enemy soldiers in a single night than any other non-combat operation in the Pacific Theater." Harold Mitchum's name is not on the placard, but the rope is there, thick as your thumb, stained with motor oil, smelling faintly of jungle humidity and the sweat of men who understood that the best innovations in war often come from the quietest places: farms in Kansas, grocery stores in California, schoolrooms in Ohio. The men who fight wars rarely write the history books, and the men who change wars rarely get the recognition they deserve. But if you look closely at how we train soldiers today, you'll find Harold Mitchum's fingerprints everywhere. In the emphasis on non-lethal containment, in the doctrine that teaches soldiers to think creatively under pressure, in the understanding that sometimes the best weapon isn't a gun, it's a rope, and the wisdom to know how to use it. If this story moved you, if you believe Harold Mitchum's innovation deserves to be remembered, hit that like button right now. Subscribe to this channel so these forgotten heroes don't stay forgotten, and drop a comment below telling us where you're watching from. Are you a veteran? Did someone in your family serve? Do you have a connection to this history? We want to hear your story. Thank you for keeping these memories alive. Because of people like you, Harold Mitchum's name will be remembered, even if the history books forgot to write it down.